Hello to all our listeners in their homes in all parts of the world. My name is Michal Hatuel-Radoshitzky. I'm a research fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies. And with me on the line today is senior INSS research fellow and former member of Knesset, Dr. Yehuda Ben Meir, who is also a psychologist and an attorney by training. Hi, Yehuda.
How are you? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Today we'll discuss how the global pandemic of COVID-19, or as we all know it, coronavirus, has hit Israel. And I may add, unprepared, that this is to be discussed. In the background, before we begin, it should be said that we're not recording this at INSS, at that regular INSS studio where we usually record these podcasts. Both of us, along with thousands of Israelis and probably people all over the world, are working remotely in our safe zones at home, adapting to the new regulations that are declared and updated here in Israel almost each night. In this regard, and before we delve into the fractured Israeli political system's ability to deal with this challenge at this time, let's speak a bit about the general strategy that we see in Yehuda. So I've been looking at other parts of the world, and while in many instances Israel's eyes are set to Europe and to the United States where things are quite bad right now, I'd like to illuminate coping strategies adopted in other parts of the world. For example, in South Africa, and you can hear by my accent that South Africa is close to home for me. So in South Africa, a mere 10 days after the first coronavirus case was reported, and with 61 confirmations on cases in which the disease was contracted, and here I'll put in parenthesis that the South African population is 58.5 million people, when 61 people were confirmed as having contracted the virus, President Cyril Ramaphosa declared a state of disaster, which enabled him to enact certain regulations. Now, the regulations we're all familiar with, and they're pretty much the same in all parts of the world, no schools, no public gatherings, and so forth. But he could also have them enforced so that from day 10, people who did not adhere to the regulations could be fined, detained, and even jailed. So compare this with Israel's kind of bit-by-bit policy. At first, there were no public gatherings, then no schools, but yes to kindergarten and special care facilities. Then a day later, they said no to kindergartens and special care facilities. Then the shops were open, but the public shouldn't go they must only go in cases of emergency. Then shops are not open, only vital shops need to be open. And then you can exercise outside, but only with one additional person. Now they're telling us you can't leave something like 150-meter radius from your house. And if you leave your home, you have to carry an ID with you. These are the provisions that we are hearing about. So my question is, wouldn't it have just been better to tell us exactly what the situation is and where we are going, and perhaps also enforce regulations from the very beginning, tell us where we're heading, tell us what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do, and don't kind of bite into our freedoms every evening. There's like almost a ritual here that every evening we sit in front of the TV to hear what are the next decrees that will limit our movement and our lives. So, Yehuda, isn't it just better to just get on with it, or just, one shot and tell us what's happening? It feels like bit by bit our freedom's going, and there's no strategy. What's the strategy?
I think your point is well taken. There is much criticism being heard in various circles, both in the medical field by key doctors and medical experts, researchers, and as well as in the economic field, that perhaps the government acted incorrectly when they adopted a piece-by-piece strategy. And the effect is that maybe now they're talking about a total closure and basically keeping everyone by force, by regulations, by law, by emergency regulations at home. And the point is that I think many people believe that we're late in doing this because we're beginning to see this week, unfortunately, and very sadly, a sharp rise in the number of people being identified as corona sufferers. And the problem is that the 2 weeks now ahead of us are lost already, because what's going to happen is it takes, the incubation period is between 8 and up to 14 days. So basically anything that the government will do tonight will only have an effect 2 weeks from now, because the people are going to be getting sick this week and mostly part of next week are people who basically got the disease already last week, if not before. So I think many people now feel that the government acted wrongly in going piece by piece. On the other hand, to be fair, if you want to be fair and look at it, we have to understand that there is here a clear tension between the health issue and the economic issue. I think that the government has made it clear, and this fits into, I would say, the DNA of Israelis, the DNA of the Jewish people, the paramount importance of trying to save every life that you can. And people here, especially those people like myself, who are in the high risk situation, really facing a very dangerous situation. So on the one hand, the Ministry of Health correctly really wanted to have these severe measures, which may happen today or tomorrow, happened 2 weeks ago, in order to have the social distancing, which they believe is the best and maybe only way to really prevent a widespread of the disease. On the other hand, of course, you have the economic dislocation, which is something also not to make little of. I mean, you have now 500,000 people, 500,000 people, that's 20% of the Israeli working population who have been laid off in the meantime for a month, for 2 months, etc. The economy is suffering terribly, and this has long-range effects. So the government tried to take a middle way. Sometimes the middle way is correct, sometimes it's wrong, and maybe in this case your point is well taken, and if it's well taken, I at least hope that the government will decide quickly and stop dragging the legs and decide if they want to go to a total closure. They take the most extreme measures enforced by law with the police, if necessary, helped by the army, in order to really have total social distancing. They should do it today and not 2-3 days later, because we're already now I think getting into a situation in terms of the increase in the people coming down with the corona, which is becoming already very, very worrying.
Yes. Okay, thanks for that. Well, I think that it is impossible and maybe even irresponsible to speak about the strategy or the larger context that we spoke about without looking at the political background that we're in, and that took us off guard while we are here dealing with this pandemic. So let's put things in context. We're after our third election in 1 year because our leaders are unable to bridge their differences. Today, now, just in the past few weeks, we saw that further to the coronavirus, Prime Minister Netanyahu's court hearing has been postponed to May. Citizens, we're told the Shin Bet is tracking our phones. Demonstrators against anti-democratic measures were blocked by the police. Chairman of the Knesset, Yuli Edelstein, has refused to convene the Knesset to elect a new chairman now, despite the court order to do so. So my next question is, what is the coronavirus doing to Israel's democracy?
Well, unfortunately, Israel fell at the same time two crises, one which basically, of course, is not connected with the other. The coronavirus crisis came as a surprise 2 months before. No one ever thought about it, or 3 months before I knew about it. And again, this is not, of course, an Israeli issue. This is a worldwide issue. This is a deep crisis, a danger for all of humanity. On the other hand, in Israel specifically, coming to our small little home and land here in Israel, we have for the past year a political crisis. But one should differentiate between a political crisis and a constitutional crisis. Until now, we have had a political crisis. Naturally, a country that goes 3 times to elections, one after the other, within a year, and is unable to form a government, which is, of course, the main aim of an election, is after an election to form a government, then this is clearly a serious political crisis. The country is divided, and 3 times in a row, Mr. Netanyahu could not form a government, and once Mr. Gantz, who had also couldn't form a government. So this is a political crisis which we still face as of this moment that we're speaking. But I must say that until now, or until the last few days, it was not a constitutional crisis in the sense that although there was a serious political divide and very great hostility within the two blocs because they're almost evenly divided, and therefore no government was formed. But on the other hand, everything in the country continued according to a democratic process. The elections were held as they should be by a central election committee headed by a Supreme Court justice. And
yes, and it should perhaps even be mentioned in this respect that even the last round of elections, which was right at the beginning of March, was even happening while the corona pandemic was going on. So there was a certain poll, I think, somewhere where people that had coronavirus had to go.
Right. Yeah, again, right. So this is important to say. It's a very important point you made. Even though we had a coronavirus, this did not interrupt in any way the proper and regular democratic process. The election was held the 2nd of March. There was, I think, a few hundred people, or maybe 4,000 people, I think, who were they didn't have corona, but they had contact with someone with corona, so they were in 2 weeks isolation, and they had special voting booths for them. Mm-hmm. And the resolution, by the way, regarding the use of technology run by the security service in order to identify people who had was also done according to Israeli laws. Israeli laws has emergency regulations. This was approved by the Attorney General, etc. And by the way, the Supreme Court has taken a decision that today by 4 o'clock, another 2 hours, less than 2 hours, it must be approved by the Knesset committee, which is supervising the security services. If not, it will be invalid. So until now, everything went okay. Now, unfortunately, we are facing a constitutional crisis.
So hang on, can I just follow up on that last point? Is there a Knesset committee that will convene today to approve? Can the Knesset different committees meet?
Yesterday, the Knesset appointed a committee, which today I take it will bring to the Knesset for approval the establishment of temporary committees to act. But as I said before, the constitutional crisis is now because, unfortunately, the Likud, which did not win the election, to say it in maybe an understatement, because Mr. Netanyahu made it clear, he articulated from the beginning what his aim was in the March 2nd election, to receive 61 mandates for his bloc so we can form a government. He failed. He received 58. Mr. Netanyahu today does not have a majority in the Knesset, cannot form a government. And what the Likud now is trying to do, unfortunately, and now we're going to a very dangerous precipice. We're at the top of a cliff. They're basically trying to, in the meantime, Supreme Court issued a unanimous decision, 5 justices. Normally the Supreme Court meets with 3 justices. This time they had an enlarged venue of 5 justices because of the importance of the issue. And they, in effect, gave a decision and an order by the Supreme Court to Mr. Edelstein to convene the Knesset no later than tomorrow and hold a vote on who will be the chairman of the Knesset. Unfortunately, 2 ministers, unbelievably crossing a clear red line in any basic democracy, called upon Mr. Edelstein not to abide by and not to act in accordance with the Supreme Court decision and order. I'm happy to say that in the meantime, 2 key ministers, Mr. Tzachi Hanegbi and Mr. Gilad Ardan, came out clearly and said that the decision of the court must be obeyed and must be implemented. And then Mr. Saar, a leader of the Likud, came out on the same. So I would only hope and I pray and I believe that tomorrow Mr. Edelstein would not take upon himself to not obey a decision of the Supreme Court. And I hope that Mr. Edelstein will indeed convene the Knesset tomorrow and put it to a vote. Who should be the chairman of the Knesset? As in every democracy, the majority will decide. So I hope we won't have this constitutional crisis, but the political crisis remains, and we have to see what will happen.
Yeah. Okay, let's certainly hope so. What is the way out then? If this is what's happening now, and I'm asking, I think this is so urgent because one of the things that, and you've also pointed this out earlier, is that this has a huge impact on the economy. Now, I'm seeing elsewhere in the world, governments are taking strides to help SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. There's a lot of action done by the government to produce all these economic packages and help to the public that is really suffering under this burden, this economic burden. With us, to the best of my understanding, this transitionary government cannot channel funds to any kind of an economic package because you need a stable government to do these kind of transactions. So my question is, again, what is the way out? Can we have a minority government? Are we going towards a unity government? Where is all this going to?
Well, as you said, there are basically three possibilities. First of all, the government is a caretaker government. As a caretaker government, it's entitled to take emergency measures, even in the economic and fiscal area. But of course, as it's clear, as you said, that in order to really take an economic program, which will try to return the country, this is a major program that has to save the economy and move it forward. You need a government, and in any case, you need a stable government. Oh, you mentioned the three possibilities theoretically: a national unity government between the Likud and Kahol Lavan, Mr. Gantz's party, the major opposition party, a minority government which can be put together by Mr. Gantz and may have 61 members, theoretically a fourth election. I think that a fourth election, it really won't happen. It won't happen for two reasons. First of all, because everything has a limit. It's true, we said this after the first election. There never was in Israel a second election, one after the other, certainly never three. But I think that, sometimes you reach the end of the line. And second of all, as long as this corona crisis remains with us, you can't even hold an election from a technical point of view. 4,000 people, they had a special ballot in place for them. But who's going to go to vote now? You have the last election, 4.5 million people went to vote in 10,000 polling places. And under the current situations, it won't be. So I think one or the other will have to happen. One or the other will have to happen. I can't tell you which, but one or the other. Either, in the end, there will be a national government formed between the Likud and Kahol Lavan, and I think that compromises is needed here on all sides, certainly on Netanyahu's position and the Likud, because at the moment they don't have a majority, and if they want a national unity government, I think they have to be ready to compromise seriously with Mr. Gantz and his party. Or if that won't work, there is a possibility. It's certainly not a desired possibility, but there is a possibility that Mr. Gantz can form a minority government which will have a backing of 61 members, even though the Arab Party will not be part of the government. These are the two possibilities, and I hope and believe that within the next 10 days or so, we should know where we stand, hopefully.
Let's hope so. Okay, to end off, I wouldn't want to leave this conversation really in such a pessimistic mode. So I will ask you, a psychologist by training, and in the past you were the chairman of the Department of Psychology at Bar-Ilan University. So please, Yehuda, give us some, maybe 3 positive things that have emerged from the coronavirus.
Okay. I also, we should try to always end on a positive note. And my wife says that I'm an incorrigible optimist. It's very hard to find many positive things about the corona because it's a terrible tragedy. When you see the pictures in the world from Italy, from Spain, from all over the world, the people dying in the situation and the people suffering economically, it's really something very, very bad that fell upon us. But I can say one or two positive things. First of all, as far as Israel is concerned, once again, Israelis have proven the basic resilience of the Israeli population. Israel, unfortunately, has faced 7 wars in our 71-year history, and large wars and mini wars, etc. And I think that we have developed over time a strong sense of resilience. We know how to react and to come together when we have a situation of a crisis. This is a different type of crisis that we face. It's not a military crisis. It's not a human enemy that you're facing that you have to defend yourself. But it's a serious enemy, even though you can't see it and you can't feel it. But nevertheless, you see the resilience in the country. My wife and myself, as I said before, we're already 2 weeks now in our apartment, more or less under siege, because our children and grandchildren do not permit us to go out. And they bring us the food, and they put it next to the door, and they stand on the elevator, so there should be 2 meters between us, according to the regulations of the ministry. And I think that the vast majority of the people are getting along and are finding a way to adapt to this new situation. So that's one positive thing, the resilience. And the other positive thing be that it could be as a result of this, that maybe we'll be able to change the style of life in many ways. For instance, you have today, I have my grandchildren, some of them who are finished military service already now studying the university, and they're studying from their home. And maybe this will be a change. Maybe we'll have more online classes in university. Many people are working from their home. Maybe this will solve some of our congestion problems, etc. So this may also be a positive development, but I think the main positive thing to see is with all the difficulties we have, the country is functioning, the country is adapting, the people have a great sense of resilience. There's a great sense of one helping the other. You have a lot of people volunteering, especially young people who are more or less susceptible to serious disease if they get corona. Helping old people, you see very, very positive volunteering people trying to help each other. And I think that this resilience is something that we can be optimistic about. And I hope that when we get over the actual corona itself, that this will also enable us to overcome the serious economic crisis which we will have. And again, we will have to find ways to get back to the regular economy. But I think, again, we have done this in the past. After the Yom Kippur War, we had a tremendous economic crisis. We got over it. We had an intifada, which caused an economic crisis. We got over it. So I think if we look positively, based on the past, we will be able to overcome this challenge, the corona challenge also.
Thank you, Yehuda. I have to agree with you completely, and also maybe just add the kindness that we're seeing here, and the community coming together. So we've seen people going out and to their balconies, not much further, and clapping for the medical team.
We did it last week. Yeah, all around our balconies, everyone clapped for 2-3 minutes to honor the doctors and nurses and the medical staff who are really doing an unbelievable service and unbelievable work.
Indeed.
That's why, thank God, until now, at least, we've only had one person who died from the corona, mainly because of the tremendous responsibility and willingness to perform on the behalf of the medical staff, doctors, nurses, and everyone else.
Definitely. So let's leave on this positive point, and I look forward to more happy conversations in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yehuda. Take care.
Bye.